You've reached the Signal Watch, movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is...
Simon Day. Hello, nice to be back with you.
Good to be back with you. We are not doing Superman 3 this week.
Or 4, thank goodness. Or Supergirl. Run away, run away.
Man, we do need to do Supergirl, but that's not why we're here. I saw this movie when I was 19. I'm now 45.
Which movie, Ryan?
The Long Good Friday. And I was amazed how much of it I remembered. Like it was amazing how much of a movie I saw 25 years ago kind of came flooding back when it came on.
I mean, it's interesting because I've been trying to show you this for at least 2 years just before Good Friday, and we've kind of missed it. And we finally got it. And yeah, I just thought you'd really enjoy it just because, you know, and spoilers for this, obviously, go and watch it before you listen to this. But it's just a great story, great gangster movie, great British movie. But yeah, it's my personal story, I've got 2 personal stories. First one is when I was a kid in the north of England, having one of those holidays I've told you about before, and it was Easter again. And I was sitting in front of the TV again, probably as an 8-year-old. And I remember an uncle saying to me, "What are you watching tonight?" And I went, "The Cannonball Run." And he looked disapprovingly upon me, sadly upon me, and said, "You should be watching The Long Good Friday on the other side." And I went, "Nah." So, because I wanted my Roger Moore Burt Reynolds fix. And that's always stuck with me because years later I realized how right he was. And the other story, I guess, is about 5 years ago, I got a chance to choose a movie to show the Alamo. And I ended up showing The Italian Job, which you came to, and we had a good night. It was good fun. But my backup movie, which I would say was a joint number one, was The Long Good Friday. I said, if you can't get hold of The Italian Job, can I have The Long Good Friday? And I'm kind of glad we did do The Italian Job because that's a bit more fun, a bit more upbeat.
Oh, it's a crowd pleaser for sure. Yeah.
But I mean, this is how highly I hold this movie up, you know?
So it's interesting you try to get it as your follow-up because I think this movie is very hard to get in the U.S.
Yeah.
Which is part of why we hadn't watched it. I just couldn't find it. I think the first time we talked about doing it, it's now just if you're looking for it and you've listened this far, it's on the Criterion channel. So if you subscribe to the Criterion channel, it's there. It's clearly a transfer that was shot in kind of the old school way or created in the old school way where they would project it and then kind of record it off of the projection because you can see some slippage in the gate at the very beginning. And now when they scan movies, they're scanning them a frame at a time. So all of that just disappears. But nonetheless, it looks really good. The copy they've got, it doesn't look, like it's degraded or anything like that. My guess is it's left over from a laser disc or something.
Well, that's a good
Um,
point. That's a good point you make because I think this is a lot better known in England still. Because really in England we have Get Carter is held up as the best gangster movie, and this is probably the second. And then you got your Guy Ritchie Pretenders under this, but yeah, I mean this really still does hold that position. And it had a very contentious kind of making. It struggled. It was actually made in 1979, but I think wasn't released until 81 because it was made by a TV company who promptly turned around and said, this is glorifying the IRA. We're not going to show it unless we heavily re-edit it. And so they were going to knock a good 30 minutes out of it, which would have made a total nonsense of it. And they were going to sell it to TV. At the same time, I think Bob Hoskins was going to get redubbed for the American version. Well, weirdly by another English actor. I guess like a more plummy sounding middle class English actor.
Interesting. Okay.
So Bob Hoskins started suing them. Everybody was suing each other, a bit like the Russells, and accidentally sued myself. And yeah, and then finally, heroically, like they did with Life of Brian, Handmade Films, George Harrison's company, stepped in, bought it, and released it theatrically. So it had a very, very last minute reprieve. And as soon as it came out, I don't think it was like a huge hit, but it was very critically loved when it came out. People were like, this is great. They've done such a good job with this, obviously a breakout performance for Bob Hoskins. But yeah, when I talk to most Americans, and I say Bob Hoskins, they go Roger Rabbit. And I'm like, well, have you seen The Long Good Friday,
So, I mean, yeah. I mean, when I was 19, I was aware, when I first saw this, I was aware he'd had another career. I think the bridge for Americans on this one is it is wildly British. And it's I think you could easily remake it by swapping out in the US by swapping out, different classes and maybe ethnicities and things like that.
Yeah.
But you basically had to be one kind of aware of how rigid the class system is in England compared to the US.
Yeah.
And you only really have those kinds of demarcations in the US in 2021, really between, I mean, there's definitely, social climbing that occurs.
Yeah.
But it would be, you'd have to make someone either like super hillbilly from the deep South. And even then, if they started following a political career, that's not going to slow them down at all in the US.
Next of Kin with Patrick Swayze.
But it's he is, just so if you haven't seen it, he's this guy who's come up from like super working class, which is thus the accent.
Cockney accent, London accent. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I kept wondering if that's the accent Michael Caine started with, and he's just lost it over the years. But
the joke is Michael Caine and Roger Moore, who are good friends, used to tease each other that Michael Caine used to say Roger's got posher over the years, and Roger Moore said he's got more working class over the years because they both come from the same area, roughly.
I didn't know Roger Moore had. That's awesome. But yeah, and so anyway, they're because he's so working class, he's trying to now work at this other level of like, I'm going to be a titan of industry. I'm no longer a gangster. Everything I'm doing is on the up and up and legit. And then suddenly all this gangster stuff starts happening, and he has absolutely no idea why. The audience is given a few clues at the beginning, but they're kind of nonsense till all the pieces come together in the second half.
So no, totally. I mean, it is a mystery box. And I think the first time you watch this, at least for the first 30 minutes, you're like, what the hell's going on? Because you've got the guys in the cottage who you don't realize are Irish, but they are counting the money. You've got Colin kind of trying to pick up a guy in a pub, and then narrowly missing, being abducted and killed. And you've got, I think, Jeff being spat at by the woman in the street.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, once you know the story, it all makes sense, but it takes a while to know the story. I mean, you're almost like kind of going at the same pace as Bob Hoskins. You're coming into this like, I left my empire fine a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
And now suddenly people are blowing stuff up. You know, blowing my pubs up, blowing my car up. You know, stabbing my friend. What's going on?
Yeah, one of the things that's kind of funny is one of the nameless people who's causing havoc is a dashing young Pierce Brosnan, whose
Chubby cheek.
character, yeah,
Yes.
doesn't even have a name. And you're just like, there was a point where Pierce Brosnan wasn't famous, which is not how he arrived in the US at all. He arrived as, here's this
No.
very handsome man, and you will know his name. And he's on the
I
cover
think
of magazines.
I think on the I've got like the special edition DVD from about 10 years ago, and it may not be on this one, it might be on the British version, but there's actually Pierce Brosnan. There's a lovely documentary where Pierce Brosnan's actually on it going, I think it was my first acting job, and I had two lines because I think he says like hi or something.
Hmm.
And he was like, yeah, it was a day's work at this public swimming bath, and it was very cool. And I didn't meet anybody. I never saw Helen Mirren or Bob Hoskins, but it was cool.
Now that you say it, yeah, even the closing shot, it's a reverse
Is
shot from
they're
Hoskins.
they're not in the same car. Yeah, they're not in the same car.
Oh my
Yeah,
God. That
yeah.
is bananas. But yeah, so the cast includes for Americans, you're not going to know hardly anybody.
We got Helen Mirren,
Yeah, well, it's Helen Mirren, who everybody knows,
yeah.
and
Paul
she's
Freeman,
as always amazing. No one here knows who Paul Freeman is. I'll tell you that.
Belloc, Belloc.
Oh, is that who? That is who it was.
Yeah,
Damn it! I kept thinking, man, that guy looks familiar. Man, that guy looks familiar. Okay.
it's you're right though. It is like it's basically a bunch of TV British stars, and a lot of these went on to soap operas. It's funny because the guy played Jeff, um, who's Howard's young kind of helper, I guess, or henchman or whatever you want to call him. Um, he went on to be in this show called Casualty from the mid 80s to now. He's actually impressively still in it now. um, and it's basically like our version of ER. So
Hmm.
imagine not George Clooney, but his mate, Anthony Edwards. Imagine
Yeah.
he's basically become the British Anthony Edwards. Which is really funny because when you see his early roles, they're in kind of violent stuff like this. I think in
Uh-huh.
another film around this time he played an IRA killer, ironically. And then so yeah, he ended up in a soap opera. You got Dexter Fletcher, who was a child actor who ended up in some Guy Ritchie stuff. He's the kid who's like, "Give me some money to watch your car," you know.
Oh, really? Oh
Yeah,
my
it's Dexter
God.
Fletcher. You got P.H. Moriarty, who's Razors.
Hmm.
He ended up in again some Guy Ritchie movies and actually Jaws 3. Um, yeah, and actually Kevin McNally, who's the guy Paul Freeman tries to pick up in the pub who gets killed. He's Johnny Depp's first mate in all the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. So they're
Oh my gosh.
yeah, so you got a weird mix of British actors here. But yeah, most Americans might know the faces, but they won't know the names. Yeah.
The guy who played Belloc was the one that was bothering me the most, but he disappears so fast in the movie
Yeah.
that I forgot to look him up when the movie ended. I was more concerned with who
Doesn't
the
really
two
talk about it.
Americans were, because
Yeah.
they played it up as if, oh, you know who this so and so Constantine guy is, and I was like, no clue who that actor is. Maybe he was a background guy in The Godfather or something,
Yeah.
but he's not like any kind of name American actor. Neither of them were. So, um,
Apparently he was in a lot of French New Wave. So he was like an American, they exported into that. And I guess he played some gangsters in that in the 60s. So he was the closest, or maybe the best we could afford for this movie.
yeah, they didn't have to actually fly anybody over from the U.S. But yeah, I mean, he's great, and the role. So there's this insertion of these Americans who are going to bring they're mafia. I mean, it's not hidden. They're
Yeah.
bringing mafia dollars to come help fund Bob Hoskins' project that he's trying to basically redo the waterfront. It seems.
Yeah.
Um, and it's this big real estate deal that's gonna get this money. It's gonna legitimize everybody. And Helen Mirren, Bob Hoskins has Jeff, his buddy, who's kind of his lieutenant, who helps him out with his
Yeah.
operations. But in this super elegant glorious way. They've written Helen Mirren as the brains and heart of everything. Like she's the one
Yeah.
who really knows what he needs to do the social climbing. She's really helping him along, and he knows it, and he's not necessarily resistant or spiteful about it.
No, he loves her. I think he does
Yeah,
genuinely love her. Actually.
but he he definitely needs to listen to her like all the time, and she
He needs
just
his
can't be that
corners.
person because she's not you know the one, she's not a man in a man's world in this movie.
Yeah.
But she's absolutely, as always, it's Helen Mirren, goes without saying, fantastic. So
Well, I think Hannah Mirren didn't want to do this because originally the part, it was a good script, but her part was bad. It was like a kind of gangster's mole, like an airhead.
mhm.
And Bob Hoskins was like, well, it kind of makes me look weaker because why would I choose to be with somebody like that? You know? And then also Helen Mirren was like, I'm not playing that unless it's rewritten. So I think they all, because Helen Mirren and Bob Hoskins had worked together on stage. So I
Mhm.
think they all kind of got together with the director and rewrote a lot of it. And I think it's great. I love the scene. There's a couple of great scenes. I mean, there's a few, but there's like the one where he's really frustrated and he kind of pushes her and tells her to shut up. And then, she starts crying and he's comforting her. But then there's the other one after he's killed Jeff, where she's like, slapping him like, stop, you have control, fix this bloody mess. And it's great, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And she has this scene where they're supposed to be taking the Americans to dinner at this pub he owns, and the pub explodes as they're pulling up. They're running a little bit late. Had they actually been on time, they would have all been, blown to
Yeah.
smithereens. And so he's going to go deal with everything, and she whisks the Americans off. And they have this dinner where the Americans reveal we know something's up. There's been bombings. Tell us what's going on. And I don't know. Maybe a very clever American would have written this scene, but it's
Mm.
hard to imagine that scene happening in an American film. They would have
Mm.
done something different of like the wife finding a clever way to deflect what was going on. But
Yeah.
instead, she totally owns the situation. It's a great
Yeah.
scene.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a very interesting, because another thing you mentioned earlier about, an American remake, I feel like how the IRA is viewed in America can be quite cloudy because in England, they're terrorists.
Right.
They're something to be scared of. And I feel like, I guess Americans kind of see them as freedom fighters. Some, not all Americans, but some do. Whereas it's like, no, this is kind of like our 9/11 a little bit. We were terrified of these guys in the 70s and 80s because they were blowing up random pubs and they were making statements. And so it's really interesting having a film where you have this gangland kingpin who's, like I think PH Moriarty says to him, who's big enough to take you on? He's like, I don't know, they're all dead. Obviously he's killed everybody. He was a competitor, but now he's up against this political kind of army who don't do things his way. There's no, like Jeff says, Jeff's kind of right.
Oh
Although,
yeah.
although
That's
he very
one of the
poorly,
greatest parts of the film is Jeff was absolutely right.
I mean, that's not a good time to put it like that to him.
Yeah.
But it's like, but yeah, it's like they pull back like ants. They don't kind of work to your rules. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and so yeah, if you're an American, I mean, it definitely, I don't want to get into 200 years
No.
of history here, but yeah, it's definitely a different picture at the IRA. So I think Americans would end up viewing this movie differently, just kind of based on that of this feels like equal territory, and or these guys who are in theory underdogs. I think you do get the idea of how just from kind of statements within the movie of kind of like this actually is a really bad situation, not just for Hoskins but for London.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's Anakin.
that, yeah, I mean, it's you kind of do have to drop your American viewpoint. I think here that you'd have to make it like it would have to be pretty much like a liberation front from some other country, like an Iraqi
Yeah,
liberation front or something.
yeah,
Like
Muslim or something. It's like, yeah, it's like,
yeah, it would be really, really hard to do a comparison. But I think you could do it. I was just trying to like put the pieces in place after the movie ended of like, Americans always, of course, want to remake everything from Europe that's, any good. And then put an American flavor on it. We have thus the birdcage.
they did
But
do they did do a dodgy version of Get Carter with Sylvester Stallone.
all that
I
did
mean,
was make me go, I want to see the original, and I did.
yeah. I mean, it is interesting though, because this film is very forward thinking, because it deals with the IRA situation, it deals with police corruption at the time. The fact that the police are in his pocket. Um, it deals with he's a prototype yuppie. He just doesn't realize it. I mean, the funny thing is, about 5 years after this film, the Conservative government did renovate all that riverfront, and that became, to this day, hot property. That's like, you can look it up. That's Canary Wharf, and he's there, 2 or 3 years before they did that, going, "This will be a good idea. We could put like an Olympic stadium over there." And it's very, he's got a plan. It's so Shakespearean, because he's the king, and he's getting dethroned by accident because of a stupid mistake he didn't even know about.
It's funny you should say that. I had a thought at some point, and it was some point where he and Helen Mirren were getting in a car. So it was late in the film. I don't know. It must have been right at the end, maybe when they were going to see the Americans again in the morning.
Yeah.
When I was like, is this actually an adaptation of a Shakespeare play? Because I've only read and seen so much Shakespeare. My exposure is severely limited. Am I missing, like, I know it's not Lear. Like, I know it's not Richard III. Like, what? Am I just missing? Because like you said, it had such a feel of like,
yeah,
it's this guy's just had to, kill his own best friend. We're going to kind of protect this overarching. He's got these goals he's trying to live up to, and then, yeah, it's really. And to your point, though, and I'll go ahead and say it. Jamie didn't make it through the movie. And it was because she and I had remembered this from when I was 19. We were saying, it's got all these pieces and you don't really know what's going on.
Yeah.
And I remember watching it the first time going, I must have just missed something in the translation, or missed it because of the accents. Like, I don't really know what's going on.
Yeah.
And then suddenly I knew everything that was going on. And it was at the abattoir scene.
Yeah.
That's when everything started clicking for me. And Jamie'd gone to bed or said, let's quit watching and I'm going to go to bed.
Yeah.
Just before that sequence.
Yeah.
So that was when everything, and I was like, yeah, I didn't say anything too much to her about it. I was like, yeah, I kind of remember struggling with it the first time I saw it, but now I kind of know where the pieces go, even 25 years later. So I was hanging with it much, much better.
Well, it kind of makes you work for it a bit. And it's like you say, it's only really when he has a conversation with Jeff where he knows exactly what's happened. Up until then, it's like, well, why was this cab driver sent to, Northern Ireland? And, why is Colin being stabbed? And and
why
all these different...
Why are widows spitting in people's faces? Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that makes it, I mean, I'd agree with you. If I could go back to the first time I saw it, I'm sure I was like, what the hell is going on? But saying that, I think Hoskins, I mean, everybody is so good in it. Plus, it's so quotable. I mean, it's almost like he gets funnier the more frustrated he gets. Like, I love, where he goes like, the guy at the pool goes like, oh, yeah, we're going to get rid of the body in an ice cream van. And he goes, oh, there's a lot of respect in that, isn't there? Going out like a Raspberry Ripple. Or they're like, as somebody else says, have you seen like Pete? And he goes, where's Pete? And he goes, well, his arsehole's probably like 50 yards away from his head. But we might have seen him go past your window about an hour ago. So it's like, it's very, very dry, very funny. But also, obviously that, yeah, I mean, the more frustrated and angry he gets, kind of in a way, the funnier it gets.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely this path of he's almost awkward at the beginning of the film because he's trying to be the
Show
the
off as much.
player, and yeah, and Helen Mirren's awesome and helping him out and kind of smoothing over some bits for him.
Yeah.
And then once he, like when he's back at the casino and all the shotguns are laid out, he's in his element, right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
and he's right back in it. He knows how to operate in this, like in the abattoir scene. I mean, and you get the feeling like now he's speaking like himself. And I
Yeah.
think that's why some of those lines flow the way they
Yeah.
do, is like he's back to being a dirty gangster for the first time in 10 years.
Yeah.
And it just worked. It just worked for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so good, and we've got to talk about the final scene because I love final scenes of movies, and we've talked before. I mean, obviously Italian Job, final scene of the Italian Job, but Usual Suspects 7. I love a kind of ambiguous or kind of left field ending. And this has got a great one because he's like he literally has. I mean, it's two parts really. The first part is him basically just letting the Americans have it, as in like the mafia, like you're a stupid little country. We're not doing business with you. You don't know what you're doing. And first of all, he's like, fair enough, okay. And then he turns around like just boom, boom, boom. I'll tell you what's great about Britain, and it's like hilariously like patriotic speech about everything. I mean, embarrassingly patriotic, but I love it. I think I used to post on Facebook because it's so funny. But then straight after that, gets in the car, and he's obviously like kidnapped, and he's being driven away, probably to his death. I mean, but they just stay on Bob Hoskins, and his face is amazing because he goes through anger, resignation, almost like a grudging respect. All these different emotions pass over his face, and they just keep that shot going, and it's great.
I kind of wondered because I agree, it's a masterclass, that wordless single shot in it,
Yeah.
like, of how do you show without telling,
Mm.
like, what someone is going through. And I mean, the thing is, you'd have to set someone up to watch the whole movie to get
Yeah.
them to that scene so they understood the full context of it.
Yeah.
But that one long shot of him in all of those things going by, I was like, maybe they thought they were going to roll for, you know, 10 seconds, and that would be a nice long shot to take them out. And that scene goes on for at least 35 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And it's
it's brutal to watch him go through all that.
yeah, because he's you literally see him thinking about the last 24 hours, going, how did I end up in this situation, in this position?
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, there's so many different emotions pass over his face. He always finds it funny at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lovely ending. I mean, like I say, I love endings like that. It reminds me weirdly a little bit like the ending of The Thing, where Kurt Russell's just like, well, let's just sit here and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Let's sit here for a while and see what happens, and just kind of chuckles to himself. Because he could be sitting there with an alien. They could just be both human, but they're both going to still freeze to death pretty quickly. It's kind of great. Very, very 70s ending, actually, 1970s ending.
Now that you say it, that's very true.
Yeah.
Very, very true.
Nobody gets out of here alive, kind of thing.
Yeah, which was kind of interesting because you don't know how this movie's going to end. I mean, it makes so many twists and turns as to
Well, he has his
what's
little
occurring.
triumph. He has his
Yeah.
triumph because, I mean, and and if this is Shakespearean, then his weakness is arrogance because he thinks he can do this. He doesn't question his own strength, I guess. But he kind of sets up the meeting with the Irish boss, where even at that point he probably could pay him off and just say, really sorry, it was all a
Mm-hmm.
misunderstanding. But instead he's like, he brings a shooter and like blows them away. And then of course you have the scene with the Americans, like, basically fuck the mafia, I'm going into business with the Germans. They've got know-how. And so you're like always on the up. And then, of course, boom, that's that's straight away the other way. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the last, I mean, the whole movie's good, but the payoff kind of the last 15, 20 minutes of everything coming together, and it just keeps shifting. Like, how is this going to turn up? And like we just said, I mean, you really think like, well, he's got more work to do, but like he's told off the Americans, who, by the way, were totally right.
Oh, they were. Yeah.
Which the movie doesn't let you think that until Pierce Brosnan is pointing a silencer at his chest, in the car. Then you're like, oh, the Americans were right. They weren't just being arrogant assholes.
Yeah.
So,
well, I suppose, I mean, he's the underdog we're kind of rooting for, even though he's a despicable character. But but yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, like from their perspective, it's like, what the hell's going on here? This guy's totally out of control. And
they realize like, oh God, he brought in the IRA.
It's like Scarface. It's like Scarface, trying to do business with him. It's like, whoa.
But I mean, and there was always kind of this thing in the media, or in not in the news, but in kind of like books and all of that around this period of the mafia trying to like corporatize, right? It's as the mafia is like buying Vegas and like going legit with the hotels and all of that. And it's definitely playing off of that whole concept of like the money might be dirty, but they're basically on the up and up. And Hoskins is doing the same thing. Game recognizes game. But everyone remembers the old bad stories too at that point. So anyway, it's a
lot of bodies buried in the desert.
Yeah. But yeah, it's got such a solid ending to it, that absolutely pays off.
So I've got a funny story for you. So when Bob Hoskins originally read the script, I guess the writer, the director, took it to him in hospital because he'd shot Zulu Dawn, mm-hmm. and he'd gone to live with the tribes people. And because of this, he'd got a tapeworm. So Bob Hoskins was like on a table, having a tapeworm very slowly retracted from his ass, basically.
Yeah.
And he was reading the script, or they were telling him the script, and he was getting so excited that the doctor was like, stop getting excited, it's going to break off. So that's why he's uncharacteristically skinny in this compared to a normal.
Okay, I did. Okay, they have you're not going to see many Bob Hoskins shower sequences, and he has one here.
Sexy, hairy man.
Well, I was like, he looks good, Hoskins. Like, I wouldn't expected that when he pops his shirt off. Okay, like that explains a lot. All right,
I do love that scene because it's like, I mean, I guess he's washing away the blood and he's figuring out what he's going to do, but they shoot it almost like they would like a kind of 70s shot of a woman. It's kind of funny. It's like very sensual, he's like in the shower, soaping up. So there was talk of a sequel. I would like to have seen this, but at the same time, I'm kind of glad they just left it because I think, you can't be that ending. But there was a sequel talked about quite a bit 20 years later. It's got a terrible title, Black Easter Monday. It was originally going to be called. So he would have escaped from the IRA gunman somehow and been hiding out in Jamaica. And then basically he comes back to see if he can retake his patch of the East End 20 years later. But there's a much more violent kind of drugs gang. Jamaican gang has actually moved in and taken over. So it would have been like an old school fight against, these new guys. And part of me kind of would have liked to have seen that. Like I say, I think probably best it wasn't made. But what I like about this as well is another weakness I think the Hoskins character has is he's a total racist, right? And, sadly for the time, obviously against African Americans, but also I think that's another problem. He doesn't really rate the Irish. He's like, these mix, coming in with their funny hats into my pub and asking questions, trying to get protection money. So he doesn't value other classes, which is very short-sighted. Um, Especially as, like you said, he's come from working class himself. So he should be used to this prejudice, kind of.
Yeah, they have the whole sequence where he kind of goes to the neighborhood that has black people living in it. And I think that was his former neighborhood. I was trying to piece together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or at least he knew it from
Mhm.
when he was young. Yeah.
And I'm not shocked. I think the kids these days get a little more shocked when they see sequences like that where
Yeah.
a character who's our protagonist is has some vile racism. And I think it's important to remember with this one, of course, he is a gangster. Like
Yeah.
he's our POV character, but he's also not a great guy. But it's kind of what he goes through, because almost at the end as he's leaving, then he's like, no one should have to live like this as he's going away. But he's not having any kind of full pivot. It's almost like a flashback to his days there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, it's almost like he's also got this kind of like mistakenly false nostalgic glow. Because actually, earlier on with Charlie, he says, these dogs used to be amazing, used to have ships lined up. And like Charlie says, let go of the past, look to the future,
mhm.
which he is doing, to give him credit. But I think he's also like, it's funny that speech he gives about the greatness of Britain is fantastic, but it's also kind of his Achilles heel because he's, I guess, like stuck in a rut in his thinking. And that's his downfall, this arrogance, this like inability to go, well, actually, I might be outmatched by somebody I previously thought wasn't a threat.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't argue at all with your point about he just can't see the Irish as actually being a problem.
It
Um,
actually reminds me a little bit of Man Who Would Be King, where you get the two English soldiers in the 1800s, and we should do that at some point. But
yeah, absolutely.
they kind of go to this, Kafiristan, very primitive culture. We're going to steal all the treasures. We're going to set ourselves up as gods. We're going to treat all the people as second class citizens. And of course, ultimately that's their downfall. They don't give it enough respect.
Yeah, I mean, the movie, because of its time and its place, and I kind of said towards the beginning, you kind of had to have been reading the news in the 70s and 80s to know exactly kind of what's going on here. But um, England itself was having some both social and economic issues around this time that
Yeah.
I think have kind of slipped from at least the American consciousness. But um, I very much remember that being like even like a joke or two in a sitcom that I'd seen of like, oh, England's now, having to borrow money from the Japanese or whatever. And that was like, that was like a funny punchline.
Yeah.
Because, England was still thought of as being, you know,
Yeah.
a rich,
Yeah.
wealthy country with royalty.
Yeah.
And between that and what was going on with the IRA, it's very kind of like period specific in a lot of ways. I mean, the IRA hasn't really been a thing now in almost 15 years, but knock on wood. Um,
Yeah.
but it's just pre-Thatcherism too,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
dawn
No,
of
totally.
Thatcherism.
Yeah. Yeah. And he is a total Thatcherite. He is like, he's exactly what, is going to become in a couple of years. Um, which is interesting because, of course, the Thatcher government were the ones that actually fought against the IRA as well, and actually Thatcher herself stayed in a hotel and which was blown up. She wasn't actually there at the time, but her whole cabinet, their hotel was blown up, and I think a couple of people got injured badly and end up like either dead or in a wheelchair. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if you're confused while you're watching it about kind of what was going on, kind of economically with England and why they would even be bothering to go to Americans for money,
yeah,
um, it helps explain a little bit of the story. But at the same time, I love the jab about the fuel crisis that the late 70s. Well, you guys can't even handle your own fuel. Yeah, well, that's true.
Yeah, yeah. It's like it's very like yeah. He's kind of like he's getting a couple of punches in there. It's like I love the talk about culture as well. We've got culture, sophistication, a little bit more than a hot dog. Know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. But I would totally recommend this film. I mean, it is I mean, I'm sure people who listen to us, are film lovers. So give it a try. If you need to, stick the subtitles on. Um, there's actually, funnily, in my DVD here, there's a glossary of Cockney rhyming slang to help you, which I found quite funny. But yeah, I still think it holds up. And Bob Hoskins is like a powerhouse in this. I mean, he's absolutely amazing. I mean, it's one of those performances that really launches a career. And I'm not surprised, Hollywood picked him up after this, and kept sticking him in things for another 10, 15 years.
Yeah. I mean, he was still popular here right up through his death. So
Yeah,
he,
yeah.
he made a real go of it here too. Um, so we didn't really talk at the beginning about this is part of the Canon series. And you did talk about how kind of important the film was to you and all of that, but I just wanted to make sure I put a tag on here for that. And these are really the movies we're talking about that, um, just really helped shape, maybe how we thought of the world or how we thought of movies or just part of our personal, list of our own greats. And I'm
Yeah.
really glad you brought this one up. I had been wanting to watch it with you just because of the scarcity of it. It was hard to get my hands on, and was delighted to figure out it was on the Criterion Channel when you brought it up as the thing you wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I mean, after that original not watching as a child, I guess I finally bought it on video as a teenager, and I watched it and loved it. And then I kind of like showed it to everybody I could, really. And I remember me and my brother used to watch it over and over and quote it to each other. And I've even like forced it on girlfriends in the past, and luckily most of them have kind of enjoyed it. But it's I think it's just a great film. I mean, it's again incredibly British and it is a gangster film, but I like how it like we said. I mean, it might annoy some people, but I like how because originally, so the original title of this was The Paddy Factor, which is a terrible title because it gives away the twist
Yeah,
straight away.
there's a lot of
It,
problems with it, and that's pretty top among them. But yeah,
yeah, I mean, I can't think of a worse title. Like it's like calling Seven. Kevin Spacey did it, and he turns up at the end with and he kills Gwyneth Paltrow at the end. But it's like so. Thank goodness they changed the title. But yeah, no, it holds up. And watching it last night, I'm like, obviously it's dated now, but it still moves very fast. And I still got totally dragged into it. I hadn't seen it for about 4 years, and I kind of was originally probably going to have it on in the background, and I actually ended up just sitting down and watching it. Yeah.
yeah, I'm trying to remember which film professor showed it to us when I was in school and how I initially saw it. I think it was one of the really young ones. So my guess is they just really liked this movie, happened upon it, and found a way to slide it into the curriculum. Because I don't remember us really talking about it in class much. I just remember like, you guys like Long Good Friday? I was like, yeah. I was like, all right. And that was like the conversation we had about it.
Yeah.
But that might have meant it was part of my screenwriting class. But yeah, it was they show, of course, all kinds of things to you in film school, and I sat through many years of film screenings, but this one still sticks out after all this time and how well I actually remember it. But
To
yeah.
say as well, gonna give a shout out to Francis Monkman, who I don't know if he ever did anything else, but great, crazy kind of 80s synthesizer score, very pounding,
Mhm.
very kind of John Carpenter in a way. Really makes you kind of like, gets the film moving and keeps it moving.
Yeah, it's Probably not something you're going to just put on during dinner, but
No.
it really works for the film. Absolutely.
I will admit to you, like Psychomania, I have driven around in my car with this soundtrack on in Austin.
Oh, I believe that. I mean, I can totally
Stopping,
see it as driving music.
yeah, yeah. I just need to jump out of my car with a sawn-off shotgun. Shut it, you slags.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much for bringing this one, and we will do this again real soon.
Yeah, cheers, bye.
Bye bye. That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.